Hello and welcome to another episode of Exploring Standards. I'm your host, Jess, and today we are back with Robert Clements. Robert, how are you today?
Oh, Jess, yeah, very well, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. So Robert has been a guest on our show many times. He is CEO of Assent Risk Management, and today he's on the show to discuss managing conflict of interest in ISO consultancy. So, what is conflict of interest? A broad definition of conflict of interest is a situation in which the aims of different parties are incompatible. So, for example, where acting in the best interests of one client would adversely affect another. An institution or a person having a conflict of interest when their personal or self-serving interests can collide with their professional obligations or responsibilities. So, that's quite a mouthful. But I think the best way to get into this episode is for you, Rob, to give us some examples of conflict of interest in ISO consultancy, and then follow that up with, how we manage them at Assent.
Yeah, thank you, Jess. This is a really interesting one for me because ISO consultancy isn't regulated, as you know, um, and so really it relies on the ethical conduct of people in the industry to stop these conflicts happening. If we were a certification body, then there's governing bodies, for example, UCAS, that set rules and make sure that that's delivered impartially. With consultancy, that isn't quite the case. So we're here to represent the best interests of the client always. But I think we also have a responsibility to the industry as a whole to make sure that the work we're doing is to a higher standard and is impartial and that people can rely on our output. So at Assent, we take that very seriously, and we've got our ethical and professional conduct policy, which we wrote some time ago. We based that on an ISO standard, ISO 20700, which is a standard for management consultancy. But that seemed to be the best framework we could find for our industry to align it to. And I think the types of conflict of interest that we might find in consultancy is a little bit different to how they deal with it in certification. As I say, our job really is to represent the interest of the client primarily. So it tends to be things related to what could affect the client. So in your introduction, Jess, you said about a situation that affects the aims of different parties. Hopefully, our aims are aligned to the client's aims always. But what we've got to be careful of, I think, is the people that we use in our business to work with the clients, make sure they're the best people to fit the client. So a recent example of that came up for us at Assent that we had to deal with was we're very lucky to have lots of clients in similar industries, and we carry that expertise and that knowledge of the best practice across to the different clients. But obviously, we're very conscious that we might be privileged to confidential information and even just things that competitors don't want other competitors to know about each other. It might not be necessarily secret, but it might just be something that they don't want out there in public. And again, we take that really seriously and we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. And we have all of our confidentiality clauses and our NDAs and all of that awareness in place within the business to stop it happening. But we need to go a step further than that and try and make it technically impossible for anything like that to happen. So the first example I would give is where we're working with two clients in a similar industry. We would register that as a potential conflict of interest, and we maintain a register of those. And depending on the risk that presents, what we may do is put an air gap in place. So that means that the people that work on one client's project wouldn't work on another client's project. So, for example, they couldn't be doing internal audits for competitors at the same time. So that obviously greatly reduces the risk of any information being transferred between the two. So that's one of the big things that we watch out for in terms of working with clients. I think another example of a conflict of interest that occasionally occurs is where people move. Perhaps they've been working at a client company and then they move from that company either to another company, or sometimes they set up as ISO consultants themselves, and maybe even start working with us at Assent to deliver those consultancy services, which in one way is really good because they've got such good experience of how ISO works, and from doing it firsthand, we at Assent we really value those people that have got that real industry knowledge of ISO. But of course, that then presents us the issue of them serving their previous company as a client of Assent. So we'd obviously avoid that if we could. And we do that by, again, registering that as a conflict of interest on our register and making sure we have different people servicing the client as opposed to the person that's left. Of course, sometimes maybe the client would prefer to have someone they know brought in. So I think that's the case where we would need to be very transparent with the client that we're working with, talk to them about what the risks are of doing that. But it might be that that's actually an opportunity rather than a risk.
Yeah, absolutely. We did a fantastic episode with Paul Venter, and he was discussing a kind of where he's progressed through his ISO career. And he was an external auditor, and now he's moved into becoming an ISO consultant. And he gave some great tips as well on managing conflict of interest in that. So make sure you check that episode out as well.
Paul Venter's a very good example and a very good support to us as a company. But you're absolutely right. Moving from a certification body into consultancy presents sort of obvious conflicts. If you were to go back to clients that maybe he's audited before, then that could potentially be an issue. I think we have that fine line to tread with our relationship to the certification bodies. Because again, I'll go back to what I said at the start of this podcast. We as consultants are not regulated, although we do have a responsibility to act professionally. But the certification bodies are in a way regulated by UCAS and by the accreditation bodies. So they have sort of rules that they need to follow. And there are obviously more consequences for the certification bodies if they fall the wrong side of those. But I think as consultants, we've got a responsibility to, again, act in the best interest of our client. I think that means when we approach certification bodies and work with them, we work impartially with them. So although we've got very good relationships with many cert bodies, and we want that, we want to have a nice work experience, and we want to be able to advise clients on the best route through certification. One of the things that we do at Assent is where we're recommending certification bodies, we would always recommend more than one. So normally we'd go for 3 options. And as far as we're concerned, we're happy to work with any of those 3 that the client might choose, but really it's the client's decision. And that obviously means that we're not impacted by any incentives that might be available, which they're not generally, but the perceived impartiality is as important as the actual impartiality.
Yeah.
So by us recommending 3 or more bodies, we avoid that issue. And of course, the client engages directly with the certification body, although often we support them and help them through the process. It is a relationship between the client and the certification body,
Yes.
really. So that's another way that we manage that potential conflict.
And so then what else do we do? What's some other steps that we take in terms of making sure that we have confidentiality within Assent?
Well, we've got our information security policies and our technical controls, so that helps.
Yeah.
I've already mentioned the conflict of interest register. So anything we become aware of as a business that is a potential conflict, so it doesn't actually even have to be a realised conflict, it could just be a potential. We would put onto that register so that our whole business is aware, or our back office, should I say, is aware that might exist. And that helps them when they're planning resources and planning projects to make sure that we're not causing a conflict. So we've got those registers in place. I think the other thing that really helps us at Assent is because we've got such a good back office team supporting the consultants. They perform a review of reports and visit notes. So every piece of work that a consultant does at Assent is reviewed by the back office with a fresh set of eyes. And what that means is they can detect things within the report that there might be a conflict, or there could be confidential information that's not needed, that's not necessary to, for example, to the audit report. So we would redact that from the report and take that out if it would be agreed with the auditor, with the consultant first, but often times they would agree. We would remove that from the report. So again, that just helps us to detect any conflict of interest. I think on top of that, everyone we deal with as consultants has the same values that we do at Assent. And we've really tried to build that culture, as I say, through our ethical and professional conduct policy is one of the ways. And I think they would be likely to raise any conflict that they felt existed before we even detected it. If they became aware of something, I think we do have a culture of raising those things and managing them so that we don't face any problems later on.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. What I will do is I'll pop some links to some blogs that kind of go into more depth about all these things that we've been discussing today, our conflict of interest blogs and our internal report review process blog as well, so people can read about them as well. They'll be in the show notes for everybody. Thank you so much, Rob, for taking the time to talk to me about this today. It's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you everyone for listening along. As always, please rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. And we'll be back with another episode in a couple of weeks.